everybody. Welcome to the unofficial More Than Just Code podcast. So yeah, we'll just get our talk started. Basically, as it says on the tin, many developers are quiet introverts by nature, and we found through our own abilities to break out of our shell and converse with people, primarily through our podcast, that we're able to advance our careers and become better developers and be able to talk about things much better. So about me, if you don't follow, anybody here follow the podcast, More Than Just Code? Some? Good. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tim Mitra on Twitter. I have been a tech blogger since 2000, as a matter of fact. So we were just talking this morning. I can be found on the More Than Just Code podcast, and I'm also a co-host on the Roundabout FM, Roundabout Creative Chaos with Tammy Corn, who's hiding in the back there. And I also write for Ray Wunderlich's tech blog. I have run my own small software company in Toronto, Canada, and with some reasonable success. And I'm currently joined TD Bank in Toronto as a lead iOS developer and subject matter expert. And that's me. Now, I could argue that I was the dev with the hair a long time ago, but I've had to concede that in the later years, and since it's all disappearing, and I'll introduce the new dev with the hair.
As Tim mentioned, a lot of folks know me online as Tim with the hair. Jaime Lopez used to lead the iOS development team at a place called OfferUp. Now I'm on the iOS engineering team at Simple, an online bank. So that's a little bit about me. Of course, I co-host the More Than Just Code podcast with Tim, and that's the sort of thing that, as Tim alluded to, we spend a lot of time as separate developers come together, talking about our own different perspectives, and that was sort of the nucleus of beginning this talk.
Cool. We're basically, Jaime and I'm from Toronto, Jaime's from Seattle. We also have a couple of other developers on the podcast regularly. Mark, who's couldn't be with us today, is down in San Jose. Tammy's down in Tennessee. And we also have Greg Hio, formerly of Toronto, but now he's down in San Francisco. So we have we're different life experiences and different ways of styles of working. We were all independent when we started the podcast. Now I'm working for enterprise. Jaime's working for an enterprise, and but the iOS is the one sort of thing that sort of brought us all together and have a common language we can share with each other. So that was the genesis behind the More Than Just Code podcast. So the podcast itself is we just had our third anniversary 2 weeks ago, I think, and so we did some numbers. It's a tech podcast. We talk about iOS. And we've had 737,000 seconds recorded, roughly 205 hours. And if you put end to end, if you listen to the podcast, it would take you 8.5 days with no sleep. And we've basically written, or we've created 11 billion 500 trillion bytes of information according to our finders. So, and we're rather pleased to say that we don't really brag about this, but if you search for iOS development in iTunes under podcasts, we come up number one worldwide. That's just through organic, doing it every week, consistently. Maybe a little bit of keywording might have helped too. And we recently found out last week that if you search for Swift development, we come up number 3 worldwide. So
it's kind of a lot to say that we have a lot of expertise and time and hours put into talking about.
Sure. So yeah, the agenda basically is why talking is good for you, what talking is about, and then how you can basically advance similar to what Serge was talking earlier today. I like to start with why, and that's from Simon Sinek, who has a really good book and a good series of YouTube videos called Start With Why, and his main thesis is that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So we start with why. So it's not uncommon for us to gather together, even as a small family units. Initially, that's your pack if you're into the sort of dog analogies. But we tend to gather in groups, large and small, and because we're tribal after all. We started off in the caves, back in 360 IDEV, 40,000 BC. That was the original one, and we gathered together, and so an elder would get up on stage and talk about the day's hunt, and what the exploits were, what the challenges were, that kind of stuff. So anytime you read a blog or listen to a podcast, stream Game of Thrones, or watch a movie, and watching a movie in an audience is an awesome experience because you all get to experience that in the same sort of tribal thing, and that sort of really feeds our base brains. Even this conference is an extension of that kind of getting together and meeting. So everything, like we talk is the clickbaity name of the talk. It's actually, we're talking about communication. And anytime you have any kind of communication channels, things are just better, right? So one of the expressions or quotes that I pick up from my coaching, when I was in coaching and entrepreneurial days, was that clarity builds confidence. Anytime you have something that you're struggling to get your head wrapped around, somebody can explain it, or you can read about it, or maybe you can do it in a tech workshop, that makes you feel better. So, and just as a sort of definition, communication means to share, basically. So it's the act of conveying intended meanings through mutually understood signs and semiotic rules, which we all know from these places can be a lot of them. And just, in our hot dog, not hot dog kind of world, I just want to point out this is not communication, right? And it's my favorite slide, so it goes in every one of my shows. So we're not taught to talk efficiently. We learn we pick up how to verbalize things as we develop in our communication with our parents initially. We learn things from other kids in the schoolyard, and but there's no manual, there's no playbook, there's no school. Well, actually, there are schools you can go to learn how to talk, but and Toastmasters, things like that. But we're generally not taught how to communicate with each other effectively. Whether as adults, in factual conversation. But we can look at learning to drive as an analogy to how we actually learn to, in our brains, learn things. So we start off with a concept called unconscious incompetence, where my 13-year-old grandson, I'll talk to him about any concept, and his response to me is immediately, "I know," as if he knows. And the reality is, when you're in unconscious incompetence, you really don't know what you don't know. Right? So if you're going to learn how to drive, you'll initially take a class in driver's ed, and you'll maybe get behind the wheel, and you'll start, realize that, what all the skills you learn in Gran Turismo and Grand Theft Auto really don't apply to driving in the real world as much as you think they might, right? So this is when you start to recognize that there's a deficit in what you know, and this is the point where you're allowed to make mistakes, and hopefully you learn from those mistakes. Conscious competence is when you reach that plateau where now you've done some, a number of hours driving. Maybe you've done your driver's test, and you've got your initial license. It's a little different in Canada than it is in the United States, I guess, but. And you're out there driving, but you're still understanding that you're still learning the sort of rules of the road, pardon the pun, but you need to concentrate because this is your learning point. Eventually you get, and most of us stay in this kind of zone in most things that we're trying to get our experience as. Eventually you get to a point where you enter unconscious competence. That's when you can eat a sandwich when you're driving down the highway, or you're just totally aware of everything. You don't have to. The driving just happens by habit. It becomes. That's what I'm looking for. It's in here, second nature, and you're in the zone. And then all of a sudden, a squirrel jumps up in front of your car, and you're like, "Oh my God!" And you grip the wheel really tightly, and you realize, okay, I'm back in the conscious competence. Maybe I'm not really that NASCAR driver that I think I am. Right? So, and just a point of fact, these are I googled these just before. I'd learned these somewhere else, but I googled them just to find out where they came from, and they're actually from what's called the 4 stages of competence, or conscious competence learning model. And the idea of like the little squirrel freaking you out, or like you see a snake in your peripheral vision and you suddenly get a jump, that's your lizard brain, your amygdala, playing games with you. And whenever you get those kind of stimulus, it's such a base thing in our brains that you have to either fight, flight, or freeze. And those kind of stimuli, you have to deal with them at the time, so they're kind of jarring. So, and just another little bit of facts here before we move on to the fun stuff, but just in terms of how we learn things, what we retain from what we learn, 20% of what we hear we'll tend to retain, 30% of what we see, but 90% of what we actually say and do. That's why coming to labs and doing and going through the exercises is a really important thing. As an analogy, I just recently did an interview. I do, because I'm a lead developer at TD Bank. I do all of the interviews pretty much. And I had a guy in the other day on paper, looked great. He worked for some companies in California, some fruit companies, some big chip manufacturers, that kind of stuff. And I thought this would be a great interview. It's like a perfect asset to have in the company. When he got in front of me, he just couldn't talk about the craft that he's involved in. He couldn't talk. You couldn't answer. The questions were kind of vague and not quite there. And it was just very, very sad for me to see somebody who couldn't actually express himself about what he does every day, right? So, and just to point out, this isn't really a new idea. This is a quote from Confucius, same sort of thing. I see, I forget, I hear, I remember, I do, and I understand. And if any of you listen to the show, you'll know that I have a real hard time remembering what the Thing-a-majig thing is, and the NS whatchamacallit is, and the doohickey that you control drag over and connect to the whatchamacallit, So I struggle to find the words to talk about things, and that can be a challenge in meetings, especially on the podcast with these guys who seem to know what they're talking about all the time, in chat rooms and rubber ducking. But even rubber ducking helps too. How many people are familiar with the concept of rubber ducking? A few people? Okay, cool. Rubber ducking, for those of you who don't know, it's kind of like this idea where if you're stuck in a learning something or trying to get your head wrapped around something, often it helps to compose an email to a senior person who can answer your questions. In my case, it's usually Mark on the podcast. Maybe create a Slack post, and so in forming the question, you sort of start to change things in how you perceive it. If you're really stuck, you can go out on Twitter and try your luck with that. Or you can talk to a rubber duck, and as I like to say, 60% of the time, this technique is 100% effective. So communicating this way changes the way your pathways in your brain work. Like when you're working in code and you're in that zone, it's a different thing than actually taking the problem and describing it in clear terms that another developer can help you answer. Even if it's just you explaining to the rubber duck, or taking a walk, get away from the computer, get out of the situation, that aha moment may arrive where you'll start to understand what the rubber duck has been trying to tell you. And, for me, it's like, oh, I forgot to set the delegate again, So that's how rubber ducking helps. So,
show of hands, people who actually have a rubber duck that they talk to. So for those who don't, it's still pretty handy to do. They're pretty cheap and easy to get on Amazon. They come in all sorts of colors and sizes. So.
Yeah.
I even got rubber ducks for my team. Little
Oh, okay, so that's a great idea. Right? Real time follow-up. Okay, great. Thank you.
This is your disclaimer.
Yeah, as we like to say on the show a lot, we are not trained psychologists. Everything we're telling you today is, of course, for entertainment purposes only.
You can control the phone.
You want me to Okay, so this is a talk that I will give one day at 360 Idea. Clean architecture in pieces, what vViper, MAVM, and dependency injection can do for your app. But think about what I just said there, right? I use a lot of acronyms, and I've seen a lot of debate online. You just go on Stack Overflow right now for everybody who has your laptops open, and go search MAVM and see if you can find huge 100-comment threads of people arguing about, no, that's not MAVM, this is MAVM. No, that's crazy, this other thing's MAVM. These terms aren't exactly native to the Apple ecosystem. They're sort of like loaned verbs and words that came from other bits. Spring MVC, and how that works in the Java community, and how this MVVM thing works in the Microsoft community, and how it works with data binding, and all sorts of extra different things that may or may not matter for our particular flavor. But it's an important step here to understand, what are we even talking about? I'm reminded of a time, long ago, when I used to work for a large aerospace company, and I guarantee some of you flew here on their airplanes. They're that big. There were two disparate organizations on essentially completely opposite sides of the company who had to come together to work on a large integration project, the sort of thing that has hundreds of people working for tens of thousands of person hours, 6 months to a year-bound project. One of the first kickoff meetings We spent about 10 minutes of that first part of the meeting with people arguing about, this is impossible, no, what are you talking about? We always do this for certification. How could it not be possible? We've been doing it for the last 50-some years. And after about 10 minutes, I said, wait, hold on. What do you think AMM stands for? Oh, clearly it means ABC. What do you think AMM stands for? Oh, clearly it means XYZ. We spent 10 minutes talking about completely different topics, right? From the better side of being a better developer, just getting the standpoint of what are you even talking about is the first step, right? Understanding what that business value is, understanding what that business context is, and then going to the technical side. That's one of the great things that you can do.
Yeah, and just as a side note, one of the things I did at TD when I first started working there, I've seen entire emails that consist of a bunch of acronyms and maybe a few verbs. And if you didn't know what they meant, we'd stop in meetings and go, excuse me, what does CAA mean, kind of thing? So I created a page in our Confluence called a TD decoder ring. And every time a new acronym comes up, I'll always take a moment to find out what it is and post it. And there's even a proof of concept application being created for the enterprise using my decoder ring as a data source.
So here's a little bit in this part of it of like what it's done for us. This is the part of the why. Okay, so we just talked about academically why this sort of thing might matter. But here's sort of like concretely how it's helped us to sort of give you a social proof aspect of it. Okay, so one thing that it's certainly done for us, and we get a lot of this through the hosts that we have on the podcast, is it helps us scale up ourselves. So here in the technology sector, we talk a lot about scaling up performance, scaling horizontally for concurrency. Okay, that's all great and well, but think about how that can be applied to us as individuals. There's essentially an infinite amount of knowledge out there that could possibly be learned, and one individual in one lifetime could not possibly learn all of it. So looking to others and talking with others to understand how can I filter that infinite set of knowledge into a finite set that can be managed and handled. There might be some things that say, wow, something like ARKit, that looks really cool. I might be interested in learning more about that. Hey, this other topic, I don't know that that's really for me, but at least now I can find experts who can help me get over that particular gap, or who may have gone through the pitfalls already and can help accelerate my learning on that particular topic. All right, let's look at Tim, right? So Tim has a BFA, Bachelor of Fine Arts, brings that humanities aspect to the show where we talk about the intersection of humanities and technology. Right? Tammy's sitting over to the back. Tammy really brings that game development technology and perspective that's way different than normal apps, right? There's a real reason why Apple separated the games part out of the App Store, because they operate differently. Even though we're writing the same kind of code, it's all Swift, it's all Objective-C, it might be whatever. Sometimes it's not even uniformless, right? Mark on our show has a long sort of history with working in the Valley on computer technology. So if you want to know about silicon chips and what's feasible there, and doping silicon, no, it's not about drugs, you go talk to him, right? And on the other aspect, there's sort of Renaissance person Greg Heo, who is into all sorts of things, but if nothing else, the one thing I know is, if I want to know what etymology is, no, it doesn't have anything to do with bugs, and Greg's the one you go talk about it. You want to say, hey, how do I name this thing?
You forgot to mention Mark in the rocket science thing.
Oh, I forgot the fact that Mark is literally a rocket scientist. So when he says, oh, this isn't exactly rocket science, I'm like, all right, you're not using that as a metaphor, you mean that legitimately.
Yeah.
I think one thing that folks don't necessarily realize, and what we wanted to bring up here, is do this sort of talking and some of the things we're going to mention here and help you build a portfolio. So normally when people think about, oh, how do I build a portfolio as an engineer? Well, you go contribute to open source on GitHub. And that's legitimately good. You get an experience working with other people, and it's helpful to work on something like an IG list kit that Instagram, not Ryan Instrument done. Okay, cool. You might have your own project out there, like some sort of library that you're working on, and show that. That's great. The one downside is it's kind of hard to stand out that way, right? Like, think about the hiring team perspective where we've got this stack of resumes, and this is yet another developer with a GitHub profile. And there's nothing wrong with that. But from their perspective, this is more like a commodity where you become a 2D cartoon cutout of yourself rather than an actualized person because there's only so much a hiring team can sort of whip through in any amount of time. So for some of the things we're going to talk about on the how you can be a better developer and how you can talk more about things and with other people, you'll end up doing things that will build this portfolio that other people can look at and say, oh, I read this person's blog, I saw their tweets, I listened to their podcast, I follow their YouTube channel. I may not necessarily agree with everything they say, but I understand the perspective. And they're a more well-rounded individual, a 3D person, rather than a 2D cartoon. I think sort of the tangentially related thing to this is the job prospects idea, right? So, sure, you might go on Indeed or Hire.com or Stack Overflow jobs, so those are legitimate ways to find jobs as well, but a lot of us on the show and our friends on the show, they found jobs by talking to other people. They met somebody at a coffee shop, they met somebody at a meetup. And as a quick sort of like example of how this is different, show of hands of anybody who's been nervous chatting with an interviewer during an interview. Okay, most people, a handful of people know. Let's go. Okay, same show of hands, people who have been nervous chatting with somebody at a meetup. A handful, there's some overlap there. But you can see the dramatic difference, right? When you're in an interview, it's a real high-stress environment, you're not necessarily yourself. And for all I know, for the individual that Tim met with, he only had a 1 hour interview, maybe a 1 day interview. You couldn't really get that whole perspective. Maybe that person is normally pretty good at communicating, maybe they would fit in the environment, but there's no way for the hiring team to know, because maybe that person's like, maybe they got like really nervous and sweaty and their palms were just not working and their brain was freezing up. And they might be saying, I really blew that. I knew what that thing was, I just didn't know how to get it across. These sorts of techniques will help you draw from your experiences and learn how to talk to other people, and also give you, if nothing else, a really good answer for, okay, you're in an interview, what do you do besides code? Besides the stuff that's on GitHub, right? So something to keep in mind. So this is sort of the section on the specifically how to talk to others, right? Like the training course sort of thing that Tim talked about. And we'll look for that in a few minutes. One of the first easy ones is tweeting. It's pretty low investment. And if you're going to craft and hone a message and you can concretely explain a problem in 140 characters, that is fantastic. It also ends up being, if you don't have a physical rubber duck, putting stuff out on Twitter is your rubber duck. You have said, oh, here's the thing. It's the delegate. It's always the delegate, right? That's the answer to every problem you have in iOS. And as a side bonus, there's a pretty good chance other people might come across the tweet and be like, hey, did you think about the delegate? It's probably the delegate you're not setting. Oh, thank you. That's why the collection view is not doing what I expected it to do. And it also shows more of your personality. I don't think that tons of hiring folks will tend to look through and like review the 10,000 tweets you've had since 2007. Pretty unlikely, but they'll at least go through a few of them and sort of see what's your personality like. Are you a generally happy person, generally grumpy person, maybe you're kind of even keel, that sort of thing. I guess there could be a downside to it. Tim and I
keep track of what you can. You can always go back in Twitter's history and look for things. So, and your employers might look at your social networking status. So, my point is that if you're going to be tweeting and putting things up on other social networks, be conscious of what you're actually saying and what you're saying, like what position you're taking or what language you're using, because that may not be cool with with every employer. So one of the concepts I brought up from my coaching days, or from when I was being coached, I should say, is this idea of a farm club, and it actually helped me when I was first starting my business as an independent developer. And that's the idea that you make a list of maybe 50 people that you want to get in touch with or you want to query. And from that list, maybe you take 10 that you're going to contact in the next 3 months. And the idea behind this is this is how you build up a network. And just, when I was doing it, was like you called them up on the phone or you went and met with them and generally just talk to them about life, the universe and everything, not necessarily, hey, I'm looking for a job or whatever your intention is. And just to let them know, it's a way of sort of creating that network, and they find out, that who you are and what you do, and then they might go, hey, Jaime, didn't you mention there was some guy that was looking for a React Native job? And that sort of connection can happen through these conversations. And one of the things I learned from having attended conferences, I think I went to like a couple of tech conferences when I first got into iOS back in 2012, and somebody mentioned Cloud. I don't know if you guys remember Cloud, but and then the light went on for me, and I thought, well, you know what? There's all these presenters putting their Twitter handle on the slide, so maybe I can just start following them. And so I did that, and I started following people in more and more over time. That's how I eventually met a bunch of people that I now talk to all the time. But just it's a funny sort of side note is my grandson just got on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and he follows one person, me, and I follow him. I think it's really cool, interesting that he thinks it's important to retweet my tweets to the audience of one, which is me.
Writing a blog, so Suresh mentioned in today's keynote how he sort of started out and how things have built up on there. Hopefully you saw sort of an echoing here of those kinds of things. It really helps you to get that practice at honing and crafting a message and explaining the business value, which I think is a kind of critically underrepresented part in our industry, where it's great to know the technology, it's great to do the technology. Explaining why that technology is important, or why you need to spend some time refactoring or rewriting this piece, or using some sort of other method that may not be obvious as a shiny new screen or shiny new feature that the business can sell. You're going to have a hard time as a developer being successful unless you're extraordinary, right? Most sort of situations we have to collaborate and work with other people who are not in our environments, who don't understand where we necessarily come from. And it's not usually the cave troll sitting in the basement and genius just pops out the other end at the end of the week, right? It's usually much more of a collaborative environment. And I think Suresh kind of touched on this a little bit, he touched a little bit on this, where it helps build a portfolio too, right? Like you can literally go back and see his blog years ago where he's, I don't know if he's ashamed, but he's like, okay, that was okay then, and that was my best then, but my craft has really gone forth and expanded beyond that. And you can tell when you see that progression. And hiring teams, I think, are going to tend to look at that and say, all right, let me look at the recent ones, let me look a little bit back and say, okay, I can see a clear progression here where this individual is expanding their base. They're not just stuck doing the same thing year over year. They're actually stretching out of their comfort zone and learning more about their craft.
And just as a side note, that's my dog, Macintosh. You occasionally hear him bark on the podcast, so he's the unofficial fifth host.
And yes, this topic, podcasting, is near and dear to our hearts because we have the More Than Just Code podcast. It is, of course, a bit more of an investment of time, right? It takes time to actually record it and put it out there, edit it, for time or content, perhaps. It does have the benefit in that it's a higher fidelity medium than the written word. So you're putting your literal voice out there. It can be a little bit difficult to make sure that some random audience understands your message because of the ambiguities in the English language itself, right? But if people can hear your passion for something, or you're kind of meh on a particular topic, or you just really hate that thing, that really bugs you so much about MVVM and how the internet is wrong, and you know exactly what that is. All right, for good, bad, or the other, people can catch that through the podcast thing, and it's yet another part of your portfolio where hiring teams, if they have the time, not going to claim that everyone is going to listen to the, what do we say, 8.5, almost 9 days stuff. They'll probably listen to a recent episode and be like, all right, I got an idea what Tim and Jaime and Mark and Tammy and Greg are about. I kind of get an idea of how they think and operate as human beings.
We've actually had people go back and listen to the first episode all the way through, and we're just dumbfounded by that.
That was amazing to me. It was like people have different demands on their time, and not everybody has time to look through another blog that's on tens of thousands of newsletters. Multitasking is sort of the name of the game when it comes to podcasting. There are tons of people who listen to our show that have told us, I love listening to your show when I'm walking the dog or doing the dishes or maybe I'm mowing the lawn or doing some other things.
Yeah, and we have a friend of the show, Katie. I'm always trying to get the show out at noon on Saturday because she cleans the house and likes to listen to the podcast. So it kills me when I can't do it. So I've been teaching iOS since 2011. That's another way to get out there and teach. I've taught in classroom environments. And the good thing about this is that when you teach an iOS course, you're going to get into areas that you wouldn't maybe get into in your job at work, right? I've done all kinds of app development right from the concept meetings with the client right up to fighting with iTunes over mobile provisioning profiles and that kind of stuff, or push notification servers. So you learn all these different kind of techniques and things, and it helps you to communicate, and it really builds your ability as a developer and hone your craft if you can talk about how someone else could learn to do this. And it's a really important thing. And Tammy's going to be talking about the same concept, I think, in her talk tomorrow. She's nodding her head up and down. Yeah, so I've taught Swift, and we had an opportunity at work to teach Swift like in 2 long, full 5-day courses with the folks at TD who were Objective-C developers who didn't have the time to go and learn Swift on their own, and we had to transition our code base over. So we got that going for us. So yeah, that's that. We also have a concept called Lunch and Learns, which are sort of shorter formats. It can be like a 15-minute talk, maybe in an iOS forum. We have a forum at our company where we get together once a week. And we'll take like 15 minutes to do a quick demo or what have you, something we're working on. But it can also be a new concept, like somebody might do a talk on React Native, or they might do a talk on, we had a girl that just went to WWDC and she chose to do augmented reality, and she actually built an app while we were all watching, showing us the code stuff. And she used her camera to point around the room and see if you were a human or not, right? So, which was kind of fun. So it's a quick way to do it, and it also puts you out in front of your employers, and sometimes, and it helps. In our case, it helps with your performance evaluation as well.
I mentioned meetups earlier. They're definitely a good place. It's generally low stress. It sounds like some folks get a little stressed talking about this. That's okay. As long as you're cognizant of the fact that it's more than just pizza and pop. And that's fantastic. I love when meetups have that, right? But I think you get a whole lot more out of it if you're there chatting with your colleagues and understanding new perspectives and sort of new ways to do things that you may not have even really thought about before. And it's a really good opportunity to get more chances to talk to people, at least as a peer. And in a lot of cases, these meetups are looking for content. They are looking for speakers because it's not as if they just have a rotating set of people who are paid to do it. It's generally all volunteer. So that's an opportunity for you to craft a message, put it together, understand some business value, and explain something to people who might come from different perspectives. There are probably people in those meetups you go to who have no clue what that day's topic is, but they're excited to learn about it, and you could be that person for them. And there's a pretty good chance that they're going to want to talk to you after the meetup as well and understand more. So therefore, more opportunities to get better at being a developer by talking.
So I was actually at the Realm World, initial Realm World tour talk in San Francisco in February, and at the famous, I don't know if you heard about it, the exploding e-cigarette session. And anyway, I posted this picture on Twitter, and the Realm team picked it up and sent it around the world, and it was another great way to get your name out there, right?
And of course, given where we're at right now, we'd be remiss to not mention conference talks as a place where you can, like a meetup, craft a message, understand that business value, present that business value, and have it be understandable by people of varying degrees. I've met people here who just changed, their career. Like they just came out of some environment where they've not been doing iOS since forever. And there's people who've been doing it since forever, and finding some balance for those individuals is a great experience for you. It's the sort of thing you're probably going to have to do at your day-to-day job, right? The other thing is, for speakers, there's a pretty good chance that people are going to want to talk to you after this conference talk that you give. So there's yet another chance to get better at talking by practicing.
I actually met Jaime at 360 IDEV, and we were talking about some concept that he thought of, and it was actually we were at the 5th year of iOS, and it was things seem to happen in 10-year cycles, and that kind of the intriguing conversation I had with him, spurred me to ask him if he'd be interested in doing a podcast with us. So you never know. And actually, I always say that 360 IDEV is one of my favorite conferences after WWDC and possibly our DevCon, which is a real hands-on one, right? But yeah, so I try not to miss 360 IDEV whenever I can. So I did a talk at Indie Dev Talk last year on the intersection of art and tech, and but the point was that as an artist and as a developer, as a solutions developer, I like to call myself, and even as a tech pundit, my goal in life is to make a dent in the universe, to just have that, it's just a small little impact in people's lives. So as I said at the top of the show, I'm Tim Mitra, T-I-M-M-I-T on Twitter, and Jaime, if people want to get a hold of you on the internet, where do they find you?
Best way is I'm at Dev with a Hair on the Twitter machine, is what I like to say. And we would absolutely love to continue talking with people that are here at the conference and after the conference online. So don't be afraid to come up, shake our hands, say hello, eat some pizza, have some pop. Go to Henry's Tavern, I think, probably.
Yeah. And just a little bit of perspective, this is I went to see a talk by Neil deGrasse Tyson in Toronto, and he showed us this slide. And it's taken by the Cassini probe as it was flying past Saturn, taking high-res pictures of the rings and things. And that little dot there that you see right there, and if it was a higher res shot, you could see 2 dots, but this is where you are. So it's a matter of just a little bit of perspective, how small you are in the grand scheme of things, right?